Why, oh why do we spend so much money on new airguns? Why not just buy them second hand? We buy second hand cars. Are we mad? Well, let's take a look, shall we? Hello and welcome to AAR on Air. Yes, yet again, flying in the face of adversity, I'm going to throw myself metaphorically to the lions here with another highly opinionated subject. But it's all right, I've got my tin hat here and I'm ready. It's time to look at the whole new versus second-hand thing. Again, this will probably help some of the newbies, and maybe this will let a few trade secrets out, and even try to pre-warn, pre-arm and protect the sellers and purchasers in the whole second-hand airgun scene. Of course, we'll get the usual group who have their own highly fueled opinions, and of course a chunk of guys who found the bargain of a lifetime from some widow and want to let the world know. That's fine, and no doubt they've already started typing. So, the fact that some poor soul has been ripped off by not being paid the right money for his limited edition day state aside, let's get into it, shall we? Let's have a look at where you can, should and maybe shouldn't buy a second-hand gun from. What are the options and outlets? Well, as always, this is going to differ from country to country and often state to state. But generally, the places you are likely to get them from are your local gun shop, maybe from local advertising sources, gun magazines, and in some places even eBay, though that isn't allowed in the UK under eBay rules. And of course, your mate, or the friend of a friend in the pub, or down the local range maybe. Now, as most of you know, I work closely with Draper's Airgun Centre in Nottingham. I'm not paid by them, but we've known each other for years, and it allows me access to information that the average Joe in the street doesn't get. And in the case of the second-hand market info, that link has been very useful. So, let's start with the whole shop second-hand market thing, shall we? And try to see it from both sides of the counter. One of the first things is what type of guns are in stock in a shop, which tells me what guns are turning over, and we can establish why. Well, it's basically broken down into 70-30. That's 70% PCPs and 30% Springer styles. So why is this? It's simple, really. People are always wanting the latest, shiny, sparkly, new, all-singing, all-dancing airgun, and manufacturers know that. So they keep bringing out more and more guns to tempt us with. Does it work? Heck yes, it certainly does. So the customer is then left with three options. 1. Stick with his old gun and face ridicule down the local range. Or 2. Keep buying more guns so they don't fall behind in the top trumps competition, costing the gross domestic product of a small country. Or 3. Trade in the old one for the latest offering. At this point, some people realised that there was nothing wrong with last year's model. In fact, it was well built, shoots well, and is pretty reliable. In fact, it's still a pretty good gun. So they look out for the potential win. So, is it a lot cheaper to buy it second-hand from a shop? Well, that depends on the desirability of the gun still. Is it sought after, or does it hold all the attraction of your mate just returned from holiday in China and is coughing and sneezing and wants to give you a bromance hug? Supply and demand, I suppose, but that applies to lots of places you could buy a gun from. The only thing I've found is a shop knows the market and the true current value of a gun, where a private individual often thinks their 30-year-old beaten-up Springer is worth a king's ransom because it holds sentimental value. Sadly, not. So, what are you likely to pay for it through a shop? Well, you are going to pay a small premium for sure, partly because of their overheads and, of course, the taxman who wants 20% of the deal. But if the shop is any good, they will also check it over and service it, make sure it's at the correct power level and even add a warranty to the deal, usually around 3 months. If they aren't doing that, then why are you buying it from them? You will probably find a more up-to-date, younger and still desirable gun will cost similar money to a new one, but it will have fitted a reasonable scope and silencer package added to sweeten the deal. And they may even come with a case or a bag and a few pellets to get you going. It's always worth negotiating a little. So, you aren't going to save a fortune in this situation, and some would argue that you're simply as well buying the new model. But sometimes a couple of £100 or a couple of $100 may be the difference between able to afford it or not. Something we should never lose sight of. Some shops, on the other hand, may simply sell out the gun in bare form and drop a couple of £100 rather than dress it up. Sadly, there isn't a fixed rule to this, but buying from a reputable dealer does give you a level of protection that all the other areas that we're going to look at don't. But with a 3-month warranty, please, please, please take it home and use it. You will need to put that free tin of pellets through it as soon as possible to make sure that there isn't anything wrong, so you can get it fixed within the time frame, if in fact there is something amiss. If you're wondering why the 30% figure for springers, well, that's because people don't swap springers as often. Surprising from a point of lower initial outlay, perhaps. Maybe, but if they get one they like, by and large, they simply stick with it. And maybe because of the lower outlay, they can afford to hold on to it when they want to buy another gun. Who knows? Let's go to the complete opposite end of the spectrum now, buying from some bloke in the pub or a mate of a mate who knows someone's mate who is selling an airgun. Well, it goes without saying you would need to be getting this at a price that reflects the fact that there is no service being completed, the gun has not been checked out by a professional and has no form of warranty and zero comeback. You have no idea if the barrel is bent, which is often a problem with some springers. The rifling could be all but worn away because they've been shooting the wrong things through it, like steel darts or steel BBs. The sights could be bent, or the amazing scope they claim is on it turns out to be an eBay special with more parallax issue than Clarence the Cross-eyed Lion. That's one for the older viewers. Add to the fact that it could have been tampered with, as often they are. I know a guy who bought one in all good faith and was so proud to show off his new purchase. We tested it on the chronograph, only to find a sub 12 foot-pound gun had been tuned to over 30 foot-pound, and in his country that made the gun completely illegal, and he was faced with a choice of keeping it and risk getting caught with up to 5 years in prison, or hand it in to the local police to get it destroyed, or to get a gunsmith to completely rebuild it back to sub 12 foot-pound levels, which would have cost as much as buying another gun. I've also seen a gun come in that couldn't knock the skin off a rice pudding. It was so underpowered. So, buyer beware, but also seller beware. Because if you sell a gun to someone who claims to be over 18 and isn't, you could be liable. So you will need to get proof of age. And if I were you, I'd also get a paper copy of that evidence just in case. Of course, you could be selling it to some old boy who is obviously over 18, who then goes home and gives it to his grandson, who gets into trouble with it pretty much straight away. Then they claim you sold it to the grandson, so get that proof. So as you can see, it can be a minefield of issues. But is it true you can get a decent gun at a good price, or a brilliant gun at a giveaway steal of a price? Because you've just bought a gun from a widow who had no idea what her deceased husband's pride and joy was worth. But hey, you have to live with yourself afterwards in that case. So, what about the other options like eBay, magazines and local adverts? Well, apart from the lack of warranty and all the other points you would benefit from a shop purchase, which you won't get, you will mostly have all the same risks as we have just mentioned. but with the potential of a few added issues too, such as distance purchasing, where the item is posted to you and has been purchased, not sold as seen, more sold unseen, with no returns often. Yes, you could have eBay protection to possibly argue your corner in some instances, but it isn't easy to explain to eBay that the gun isn't accurate for some reason and you should get all your money back, or that the barrel is bent and the seller blames the courier, and so on. When it comes to airguns, especially second-hand ones, I would always say try before you buy. Now, if the advertised gun is miles away, you're left with a choice to either risk it or travel a heck of a long way in some instances, only to find out that it isn't exactly what they claimed it to be, which of course has saved you buying a pile of scrap metal. But of course the whole experience has cost you a few gallons of fuel, which in this day and age is not an inconsiderable amount of money. And if you're going to be doing that a few times just to save a couple of hundred on a gun, you could soon rack that saving up in fuel costs alone. So, your choice of purchasing options has to be perhaps weighed up as a risk versus reward. Yes, you can happen on a really good gun that is honest and straight from an individual who is not trying to rip you off, and there are quite a few of those guys out there, but it isn't a guarantee that you will find someone like that. And if it's a Springer, make sure you do your homework, because as we've already said, generally Springers don't change hands, certainly not as often, and definitely not the good stuff. Let's take a moment to look further into what guns hold their prices and which are likely to be worth more melted down and used as tent pegs. Well, without going into specific guns, top of the list for depreciation is often the FAC airgun, because it has a limited market and is not a simple process to exchange freely. And generally people buying FAC guns have done their homework and know what they're looking for and simply buy and hold. Whilst we're talking about FAC, the real bottom end, almost scrap end of the FAC market does reasonably well, because some people buy them simply to keep a gun in a slot on their ticket. So naturally these do change hands fairly often, but they are generally done via a gunsmith for obvious administration reasons. Old Springers are also 10 a penny, along with the real budget end ones, because you're likely to be offered very low prices when you trade the new budget ones in, because the shop can often buy them in as easy and just as cheap new from the manufacturers in the first place, taking into account the taxman and bulk purchase discounts, that is. Surprisingly, limited edition guns can also be subject to poor resale values, especially when the gun was produced in fairly high numbers, such as 500 to 1,000. It is really only when they are limited to, say, 1 to 200 worldwide, and they are a few years old, because in the first 2 to 3 years they're likely to depreciate pretty similarly to the standard version. It is really only when they get older that, and of course they need to be in superb condition, that they begin to see the true values and may even start to increase in values. Of course, if they've been used daily and show signs of knocks and dings, then they aren't likely to be worth much at all. The ones that hold the value are the older mint condition limited editions, along with rare classic guns, especially some of the collectible Springers, and of course the latest must-haves will also hold a fair proportion of their value. The bottom line really is condition in all of these, and I've seen people present some really beaten up guns expecting top dollar, and surprisingly been very upset at the offered amount, and even more upset when they've been told the shop doesn't even want it if they gave it to them, because they will never sell it in a month of Sundays. Yes, I've seen it happen, and I felt it was fully justified as well. I wouldn't want it taking up valuable space in my gun safe. There is another issue to be aware of, and that is spares, because a gun manufacturer will often only carry spares for a discontinued gun for around 2 years, certainly after it went out of production. Yes, there are lots of third-party companies who can supply some of the parts, but it isn't guaranteed. I realise I've really only mentioned springers and PCPs here, but the same applies to CO2s and the like, and really a lot of it is simply common sense. But if sense were common, we'd all have it. So, in conclusion, weigh up the options of where you can and want to buy from. Check the gun over before purchase, and if at all possible, shoot it and put it through a chrono. Get some paperwork, just in case it turns out to be stolen. Don't buy out of the boot of the car in the pub car park from someone you don't really know. If in doubt, walk away. Quickly, in fact. I know it may sound like I'm defending gun shops, but I assure you I'm not. This is purely an exercise to highlight the pros and cons of each area and the risks involved. Better to buy right and buy once rather than finish up buying nothing but trouble when you thought you were getting the bargain of the month. Do look a gift horse in the mouth in this circumstance. Hopefully some of this has been useful information. If it has, don't forget, hit the subscribe button, and the thumbs up button is really important to us. That's it. I'm off to sort out next week's programme. Stay safe, shoot safe, and thanks for watching.